Okay, here we go. I'd like to call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Tacoma Public Schools for April 26, 2018 to order. Would you all rise for the flag salute? And Director Hines, would you lead us today?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
General Counsel, please call the roll.
Yes. President Cobb.
President Cobb's on her way.
Understood. Director, Vice President Vialt.
Present.
Director Winskill.
Here.
Director Hines.
Here.
Director Leone.
He is excused.
Understood.
Great. Before we move on, we just want to welcome, it's great to see all of our teachers here, and we really do appreciate the great job that you do for us, and we are a part of a great team here at Tacoma Public Schools. So thank you for all being here. It's great to see that wonderful sea of red. Adoption of the agenda.
I move adoption.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments regarding the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, it is adopted. Item number 5, recognition of staff, students, and community. 5.1, recognition of Gold Star Community Partner Award to the Puyallup Tribe of Indians Historic Preservation Department.
Good evening. Good evening, Director. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Amanda Scott Thomas from the Community Partnership Office, and thank you to the Board of Directors, Superintendent Santorno, Deputy Superintendent Garcia. This recognition is the Gold Star Community Partner Award. Tacoma Public School defines partnership as a cooperative relationship between students, families, schools, school districts, and the greater Tacoma community. Partners are committed to supporting student academic success and the success of the whole child. Our partners work with, invest in the education of our students, whose future in turn will affect the quality of life in the entire Tacoma community. When it comes to student success, Tacoma Public Schools recognizes that schools cannot do it alone. And in recognition of the investment of time, talent, and resources for TPS students, families, and staff, the Gold Star Community Partner Award signifies honor and thanks to a community partner who has made a difference by doing what is best for kids. The Puyallup Tribe of Indians Historic Preservation Department has been created to preserve and honor distinct artistry, history, and social practices of the Puyallup Indian tribe. The Puyallup tribe is well known in Tacoma for its role in bringing diversity and cultural enrichment to our city. Besides serving as a classroom site for many non-tribal members to learn about Native American culture, the Puyallup tribe opens its arms wider and presents its artistry and history through classroom visitations. Over the past 3 years, the Historic Preservation Department of the Puyallup Tribe has brought artifacts and items of historical significance to students at Jerry Meeker Middle School. Through these presentations, students in the United States history classes have developed a greater respect and understanding of Native American culture and artistry. For many of our Native American students, it has provided them an extra amount of pride in their culture as well. So it's the recommendation of the Community Partnership Office that the Board of Directors recognize the Puyallup Tribe of Indians Historic Preservation Department as being awarded the Gold Star Community Partner Award for the month of April. Can we have Nicole Barandon come up, please? Is Nicole here? Nicole has not made it. So we want to accept this on behalf of the Preservation Society, and we are moving that you approve this Board of Directors Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, and we thank the tribe for their great contributions, not only in this respect, but also for the awarding of funds each year that they do for us to provide programs for our Native American kids and may participate in a joint powwow in our graduation. They're a great and wonderful community partner. Okay, moving on. Item 6, Superintendent Report, Legislative Wrap-Up. I have to ask General Counsel, is it all right if I come down, if I'm still here, we still have a quorum, and ask Director Winskill or Director Hines to preside?
Oh, because you're going to be
I'm part
helping
of the
to present. Sure.
presentation. Okay, so whichever one you want to fight over, it's got,
Okay.
you want to,
No.
Debbie, I don't care.
Yeah. Go
Whichever.
ahead.
There we go.
Okay, do I get to stop you?
No. We won't listen. The Superintendent's report is
Rosalind?
legislative wrap-up, so.
We just need one more place we get to sit together. There you go.
Yeah, what is there? I don't see anything to read.
So Charlie here too.
Sit down here, ever. This is funny.
Okay. Do you want to just introduce?
So Superintendent Santorno, I'll let you introduce our
So
legislative.
we're glad to have Director Vial and Dr. Charles Brown, who is our advocate often for us in Olympia, to come and give us a wrap-up of what the legislature did. Thank you.
Great.
We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. One of the people that we are very fortunate enough to have working for us is Charles Brown. Charlie has been a governmental relations person in Olympia for, well over 25 years that I've known, and has been very effective in advocating for us and for our kids. So what we're going to do is every year in November, we adopt a legislative agenda that we think things that we need to get done and that we need to have the legislature get done for us. So what we're here tonight to do is to give you a brief report card on the legislative actions of those objectives that we set forth back in October, November of 2017. And I'm going to let Charlie begin.
Okay, well, thank you. Superintendent Santorno and members of the board, I do appreciate all the support that you all and all of your staff, quite frankly, provide throughout the legislative session every year. As you know, the legislature has had quite a bit on its plate in the last several years with the McCleary lawsuit and the funding structure changes that are going into place in Olympia. And the legislative agenda that you all adopted back in the fall, December of 17, was quite frankly a fairly long list of issues that needed to be looked at from the school district's perspective. So we thought it'd be valuable to just kind of give a quick overview as to what happened. So what I'd like to do is we'll just start covering everything on the legislative objectives document point by point as they were put together in 2017 as we went into the legislative session, and kind of let you know how we did. So the number one issue on that list was the statewide local levy rates issue, and for many districts, the levy caps, the enrichment caps is what they are now, are capped at either $2,500 per student if you happen to live in a property wealthy district, and it's about $1,500 per student in districts that are not quite as property wealthy. And we believe that it's important that we have equity among all the districts, and Tacoma is one of those that fell on the cusp of the 2,500, so we're down to 1,500, and we lobbied the legislature to try and modify that, and we had some success in the House of Representatives. Quite frankly, we did very well there. The Senate understood our issue. They were sympathetic to it, but modifying the agreement that had been struck back in July of 2016 or 2017 was, in a way, a bridge too far, I think, for the Senate. So we were invited to talk to members of the legislature and explain just how dramatic the impact is on the district. And what they agreed to was a one-time, single year, hold harmless provision particularly for Tacoma School District of a $12 million appropriation. So we did not get the full enrichment goal that we were looking for of $2,500 per student. We will continue to fight for that because we think there's an equity issue there. But we did get an appropriation that will at least carry us through the 18-19 school year, we believe, to cover those additional programs that we use to help students get to that 86.1% graduation rate that all of you and the staff have been able to accomplish. So
I think it's important to note that our voters, when they voted, thought they were voting on a $77 million levy and not on $1.50.
right.
And I've had discussions with people who don't understand why that happened. So we have the authority, and our voters did say, go out and get the $2,500 per kid, and they did it at almost 65%. So what we're going to work on the next session is getting them to say, okay, local school boards, this is local dollars. Local school boards, you have the option of choosing the $1.50 per 1,000 of assessed valuations or the $2,500 per student based upon your assessments of your school district needs and your community needs. So that's going to be a priority for us.
But it is important to note that and that's exactly right, we'll work toward it. But the law as it stands now, the district will have a 55% cut in its local levy, its enrichment funds going out into the future. So the second issue was the elimination of the gap year in staff salary funding. When 2242, the McCleary agreement, was put together, they were funding about half of the salaries for all staff, classified, certificated, and administrative, through the first year, and then they were going to follow up in the second year and give the other half from the state level. What we were trying to do was say we need to at least preserve our local levy money until the legislature fully funds all basic education staff funding, and the legislature ended up fully funding, as you know, the staff salaries in this upcoming year. So they eliminated the gap year by fully funding all basic ed right up front. So delaying the local levy impacts did not occur. So we still will have those local levy cuts next year, but we will have the full funding. So in essence, we had a full win there because we were able to get rid of that gap year in the state funding of staff salaries. So very pleased with that. On the document that you've got, or the PowerPoint, the arrows side to side are kind of partial wins. The pluses are a full win, and down below you'll see a 0 where the legislature is still considering our requests. The third issue is relaxing the spending restrictions in categorical funding. The legislature, again, in 2242 said, sure, we're going to give you a lot more money for staff salaries, but we're also going to restrict how you can spend that money. And a lot of that money is restricted in the learning assistance programs, and in 2242 at least, the K-3 class size reduction, there was specific funding for that. We were asking for some flexibility in those arenas. We got some flexibility in those arenas, particularly in a one-year extension in the requirements for meeting the K-3 class sizes. So the statewide, that was a big issue that school districts were concerned about. The legislature adopted that one-year reprieve. I cannot tell you whether the legislature will continue to extend that K-3. It would be my recommendation that you're all planning for K-3 funding restrictions coming in the what will be the 1920 school year. So as you're looking out over your budgeting process, you're going to have to really look closely at some of those spending restrictions, because I think that the legislature feels that they've given enough extensions on K-3, whether we have the space, classroom space or not. And quite frankly, the legislature also acknowledges they haven't funded the capital budget the way that they need to give this classroom space. But I don't think they're going to continue to provide the extensions in K-3, just for your long-term thinking there. The next issue would be the full funding of special education costs. As you all know, the legislature fails to fully fund special education, which by all rights is a basic education function of the state. It did not get highlighted in the McCleary decision. The legislature was really working over the last several years to fully fund the requirements of the court under the McCleary decision. We did make some progress, however, in special education. I think it's important to note that the legislature does understand that it's an issue. It's a very expensive issue for the legislature. We got overall statewide about $30 million additional in special education funding. The funding factor back to the districts goes up. That will help us, but I believe that even with the assistance from the state, the school district will still be carrying about a $10 to $11 million, give or take, cost from its local levies that you're going to have to budget for. So that any additional funds outside what the state is giving, you need to factor in that whatever we have at the local level still has to be covered under those requirements to fully fund the actual costs of special education. There were a couple of other minor edits for special education that the OSPI is working on right now, access to the safety net funding, but to really fully fund the special education, the estimate is that the state is going to have to come up with several $100 million more statewide to truly cover those costs. The next bullet point issue that we had some partial success on, of course, was the full funding of institutional education costs. As you all know, that Tacoma School District provides the education over at Raymond Hall in our institutional facility over there. The legislature over the course of time has not fully funded institutional education, so you've had to use your local money to do that. Now that we're going into this new funding formula regime where enrichment money is truly supposed to be only for enrichment, not for basic ed, the legislature is going to have to step up and work on the institutional funding. There were a number of bills out there on fully funding the institutional education costs. Other districts are bringing that up, and legislators are as well. It didn't make it past the finish line, but they did nominally address the allocations for the special ed institutional special education costs in institutional education. So, while we got a piece, but not the general cost.
Yeah, we didn't
That's
get the
exactly right.
general cost, so.
So, again, another area where costs that are basic education costs will still be borne by the district. The adoption of a staff mix formula and salary allocation schedule that was eliminated in House Bill 2242, the agreement back in 2017. We were asking for them to go back in and do more work on that. Legislators heard from districts across the state on this issue, but did not go in and do a staff mix formula just because of the new salary levels that the legislature put into place in 2242. They didn't have the I guess the amount of time necessary to really work on a staff salary or a staff mix formula, but they did address the experience factor allocations, which was really quite important because you've got a number of teachers obviously with quite a bit more experience that additional allocations for recognizing that additional education was important, and we were advocating for that as well.
And I think that's something we'll go back next January and
I believe
ask
so.
for that to be addressed, particularly for a district like ours.
I think so. I think so, absolutely. So those were really the big funding areas that we were trying to tackle just kind of in the wake of the agreement that was passed in July of 17. There's quite a bit more to be done there. One state legislator, prominent state legislator, indicated recently at a public hearing that while the legislature may have met the terms, what they believe the terms from the state Supreme Court were under McCleary. There's a lot more work to be done on the overall funding structure for school districts, and I would argue that not the least of which is the question of the $1,500 per student in less property-rich districts than more property-rich districts.
I think the other issue that we're going to ask to look at is the issue of the equity in the school funding formula itself, in terms of the way in which that was put together. Those districts with high assessed valuation, for example, like the Issaquah School District, receives $3,300 per student of state, what they call funding of basic education dollars. Our district, Rosin, is it 1,080?
I'm so sorry.
I'm on the funding formula, the actual direct, the basic ed funding
1,360,
formula.
wasn't it?
Basic ed
Don't know
funding.
what it is that what the comparative is.
Well,
That it's a project for 300
Yeah,
per student.
good, yes. Okay, what are we going to collect off of this for basic ed? Yeah, per kid. $1,005. Okay, we don't know yet. Okay, we're still figuring that number, but the original number that we saw was around $1,200 per student, and we're not the only ones. The superintendents met, and that for some reason the legislature based that basic ed funding on assessed valuation and based it upon how much a district raises. So what happened was wealthier districts wound up getting more money than those who have lower assessed valuation than we do, and we think that's an equity issue, and I think we're going to, and so do some legislators I've talked to. They did not realize that's what they did until the end of session, and I think that's one that you will see districts across the state who are in that category coming back and saying, this really doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. And I do know how hard it is for the legislature to come up with a direct funding formula, a basic ed funding formula for 295 districts who vary in size from 15 students in a K-8 school down over in eastern Washington to almost over 50,000 in Seattle. So they're going to have to go back. They had to do this back in 1983, and they know that there'll be some tweaking. And one of the things that I personally am concerned about, and I know our board is too, is this equity issue about funding for a school district like ours that has a 62% poverty rate to receive substantially less dollars than a school district that has a 7% poverty rate. So that'll be one area I know that people are concerned about, that we'll be also monitoring and working hard on.
The next area that we are looking at in terms of a broad bucket are the capital budget items, and the state does provide some state matching money for school construction. That school construction assistance program funding has generally not kept track with the actual costs of construction. In fact, for the past 2 decades, it has not kept up with the actual cost of construction. Tacoma knows that all too well. I believe that we probably only get about 10 to 15% at the most of matching money from the state. So we've been working over the course of time to increase the match money from the state in the school construction assistance program. The Senate actually moved out a bill that would have increased that funding significantly over the course of the next 3 biennia, 6-year period. The House was not ready to adopt a bill that had a price tag quite that big in the capital budget. So they agreed that they're going to continue to review that, figure out ways that they can get those matching monies up. They know that if you don't have, if the state's going to be providing school construction assistance funding, it ought to be in line with the actual costs of construction. But I think it's important to note that the legislature did, when they adopted their capital budget back in February of this year, did provide a record overall amount of money for school construction of $1.1 billion in the school construction assistance program. They're showing a desire and a willingness to continue the program and keep it going. The next question is going to be, where do they find the additional money for actual matching money? and we'll be engaged in that. Obviously, districts like ours with aging buildings that we need to revamp are going to be needing that. We're lucky to have a school bond that passed a couple of years ago, providing over $500 million, as I recall, for new school construction, but we have more schools in the pipeline that need to be done. And then when you've got growing school districts, they also need new schools to support the kids that are coming into their school districts. So I think that's a critical issue to keep working on. The second bullet point is to authorize the simple majority vote for passing school bonds. Broke my heart today to see Peninsula School District's article in the paper that they got 58.8%, give or take, of the vote in support of their bond measure, but that does not mean that it passes. You still have to have a 60%. We've been working over the course of time to get to a 50% vote. There have been proposals out there to go to just 55%, so it does show a little bit more of a supermajority. But those bills have not made it through the full legislative process as of yet. I don't think that we should give up any time. We need to get down to the 50%. If 50% of the people are saying this is important for our community, then that 50% in a democracy like ours should be able to win the day. The third issue in the capital budget arena for this year was to support Metropolitan Parks of Tacoma in our partnership programs. You all know that Metro Parks is a key partner of ours. Take a look at Sammy, right, where we've got our school building on park property over there at the zoo. We share various properties with the Metro Parks, and we were happy to move forward at the request of Metro Parks to support their partnership program funding requests, and they were all very successful in this capital budget this year. And I think it's important that we continue to build that relationship with Metro Parks, because the ability for the school district to provide access to open space and parks, and then get the coordination with Metro Parks really makes Tacoma one of the more unique communities to live in and school districts for students to attend, I would argue. On K-12 policy, we spent so much time on funding. You know, policy is still out there as well. We wanted to allow the use of associated student body funds to supplement educational experiences for students that are in credit-bearing classes. There's a funny little provision in statute that says that ASB funding is not supposed to be used in credit-bearing classes. That's not necessarily the practice among any of the school districts. A number of school districts use ASB funds for programs that are related to credit-bearing classes, and it's really an auditor issue. We did bring this to the attention of the legislature in a couple of different opportunities in both the House and the Senate. It got wrapped up in a fight over a proposal to actually cut ASB funding to just $5 for students, which would have had a dramatic impact, negative impact, on each of the ASB fund programs at each of the schools throughout the state. And the idea of we had a hard time trying to separate those two issues, that we can use it for the credit bearing while we were trying to argue you can't cut us to just $5 per student because you'd wipe out the whole ASB type of a program in the first place. So it's our intention to be working with the House member who was a staunch advocate of this proposal, and see if we can work through that, issue. So unfortunately, that score also got none. It wasn't for lack of trying, it was for different issues kind of getting wrapped up into the same
Could you
piece of
clarify a little more about the use of credit? Give me an example of ASB funds and credit-bearing issues. I'd like to, I don't quite understand what it would be used
Some
for.
of the ASB funds might be used for band, let's argue, and band is a credit-bearing
Okay.
class, right?
Like going to
Yes,
a
if you're going to go
function
to
and-
a
okay.
field trip or something
Okay.
like that, and you're helping to get the kids to the field trip, the state auditor has just noted that you're really not supposed to do that, but it's done all throughout the state. So what we're trying to do is just simply modify the statute itself. So band, some art, some other field trips. It gets into those areas. It's not a barrier to access for the student to get that credit-bearing class. What it is an opportunity to get the students outside into other programs. It's the enrichment that each one of these programs. It's great to have a band class, but if you don't get to go perform down at the Rialto Theater in front of the community, it's not quite the same, right?
Or, Debbie, for a number of our kids' opportunities to go to competitions that we have to raise money for example.
Thank you
in
for
band.
clarifying that.
Okay.
Okay, good.
The second issue in K-12 policy was the law requires that the school districts track disabled persons from birth to age 3 currently, and the school district has traditionally been a very good place for that activity to happen, so that we know where those kids are when they're starting to come into the educational world, and making sure that we get them into the system and give them the assistance that they deserve. And with the formation now of the Department of Early Learning and merging a lot of that with the Children and Family Services programs, Early Learning and those folks we've talked with them. They agree that they are a better entity now to provide those services from birth to 3 and then hand them off later to the school districts. And so we worked with them on legislation that would allow this transition to begin. Now, there are some school districts that want to maintain those programs, so it is a voluntary program through the Department of Early Learning, but the legislature, in its final act of putting those two agencies together, also, as part of it, adopted this transition opportunity, which was really quite important, I thought, for Tacoma School District. And we were testifying and signing in support of those efforts all along. I will say that I think that we have a real partner with the new Department of Early Learning and the Children and Family Services merger. The Department of Early Learning, as it started out many years ago under Governor Greg War's administration, was just a fabulous proposal, policy statement that the legislature and the governor made, and now they're really going down the road of taking all the ancillary programs that have sat out over at Department of Social and Health Services, and they're putting it all into the Department of Children and Family Services, I think is what the new formal name is going to be for that program. So we were successful in that. The final couple of issues in K-12 policy, supporting legislative proposals to address the teacher shortage. Heaven knows we are in need of more teacher support, and we have been working with legislators on both sides of the rotunda on this issue. It just comes down to the fact that the House and Senate are divided on the approaches to this policy. We were able to get the teacher salary levels modified, which is incredibly important. You keep teachers by having the entry level pay be more and recognizing their additional education beyond, and so the incentive pay that that the legislature funded was all good, but we still haven't gotten to a more holistic teacher shortage public policy. But I know that that's also being worked on with a number of different stakeholders, including OSPI.
Higher
and,
ed schools of education, too, I understand, are involved in that.
I think that they are in trying to provide more of those programs and help move folks into it. And then the supporting the programmatic supports for kindergarten preparedness, especially for those who qualify for free and reduced lunch and for whom English is not their primary language. The legislature again did complete the integration of the all children's services and Department of Early Learning, and we think that that is going to be a real benefit to all of the early learning programs that are out there, including that of the Tacoma School District.
Yes.
So very pleased about all that. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions. It was I would argue, a very successful year for Tacoma School District this year. You go down there with your legislative objectives in hand, and if you can say you got some of them in just about every area that you were in, that's a pretty good year.
Now we'll just go back next year and ask them to fine-tune a bunch of stuff.
And the year after as well.
The year after, and the year after that, too.
That's right.
Are there any questions from members of the board? Director Winskill?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about staff mix, which I think is so important as an issue. And over the years, people have come to me and said, I would never be hired by Tacoma because I have 20 years experience in another district. And I said, no, we are reimbursed for teachers who have experience. And the idea that they have kind of abandoned that doesn't bode well for us in the future. So I think that just needs to be right on top of our list. And then as you were talking about higher ed, I just had this brainstorm. So I look at people who want to maybe go back and get another endorsement, and it's always been crazy to me that if you can teach high school math, then you have to get another endorsement to teach middle school math. But if we could talk to the legislature about having a tuition that people could afford for getting your maybe perhaps master's or going back and getting your teaching credentials, rather than do it as a master's and have a higher tuition. I think that would be really helpful for people who later in life want to go back and maybe become a teacher, because the tuition is so high right now for anyone who already has a bachelor's degree. So I'd like to see something like that put on our list next year for things to advocate for. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Director Hines?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, especially last week we had the study session. And as the study session went on, I got more and more cranky, and then I had a week to cool off, and then I find myself getting more and more cranky. So it's probably good we have a week where my head would pop right off the top of my body. We're getting closer to the question that I asked last week about the Delta, because there's a message out there that I've heard a number of legislatures perpetuate, that is, oh, we fixed it, right? Done. We got the money. It's all you need. There you go. And as we've asked question after question after question, well, we're not really certain what to make of it. And I know Rosalind has been under the microscope because I want to know what's in there. And I hope the legislators know what's in there. And what we're finding is, we didn't know that was in there. When I hear that the SCAP program is not based on reality costs, great, they've done $1.1 billion. Maybe we should throw an R in there and just scrap it, right? Because you're just throwing, here's $1 billion, and I feel like that's what they've done with funding for basic education, is to say, yeah, we fixed it. Oh, we didn't realize that it's disproportionately benefiting teachers, and I love the property rich, right? That's an equity issue. That's discrimination. I'm getting closer to a point, but I'm stress relieving right now, so bear with me. So my first question is, when we start to look at things like capital budget and this insistence of the legislature for K-3 class reduction size, even though, to the best of my knowledge, it's based on an antiquated study, one single study. We're data-driven, evidence-based. I am that to a fault. And so there's this persistent, we've got to get to K-3. Oh, by the way, we're not going to give you any more money. So, Rosalind, is that something that comes out of reserve? How do we compensate? So that's a reserve hit.
Or basic education.
Yeah, comes out of basic ed or reserves.
And then, okay, we are having smaller classrooms, so I need to build more classrooms, but they're not going to give us capital budget because SCAP is just some arbitrary program. So is that a reserve hit?
No, that's capital hit.
That's a capital.
So we're going to have to take a tough vote later today on, we got this amount of money a few years ago, and because of escalation and other factors, we now don't have what we need to include the state well underfunded what we expected would come from the state portion. When we look at the 55% cut in enrichment funds, and they put the $12 million one-time appropriation, is $12 million the delta? Is that what we need?
For 1819.
Right, but going forward, we don't know.
More, we'll need more.
We're going to need
We'll need
a lot
more than 12 million, and this and they gave it to us this year. But when we need more than 12 million in years future, reserve, is that where do we come up with that?
Reductions.
Right, so we got to start to make more tough choices.
Because if you remember, in terms of our reserves, we have a 5% rule on reserves, and we're down to 6%, 6.3 approximately reserve.
6.4%.
Oh, sorry,
We're anticipating to end this year.
Okay, 6.4, so I'm 1/10 off of that percent. So, in other words, it's going to be reductions is what it's going to be, because we have to maintain that reserve level as for all of our other operations, to make sure that we don't go where a couple of school districts are headed, one in particular.
Yeah.
So we're looking at reduction, bottom line. That's it.
If the legislature maintains the course that they adopted just last year and modified slightly this year, then yes, absolutely, the school district will be looking at cuts probably and reductions in overall funding. When Director Hines, when you say that the legislators say we fixed it, what I think that they're referring to, and it's not necessarily announced to the public, is what they did was to comply with the Supreme Court requirements under the McCleary lawsuit, where they are funding, in essence, 100% of the basic education costs under a prototypical school model, which is a model that's based in statute. It's just that. It's a model. It's not what a school district actually requires to get to the kinds of graduation rates that Tacoma has been able to get to in other school districts. Tacoma's mantra has always been, it's for the students. We've got to get these graduation rates. We're going to do what's right for the students. So Tacoma has funded more teachers, more staff, more counselors, more nurses, more programs, innovative programs that helps us get to that 86.1, because not every student learns in the same manner, right? That's why we've got some of the innovative programs. The legislature, in its model, does not take that into account. What the legislature did was fix the McCleary problem that they had on their hands from the Supreme Court. But they, in doing that, they came up with these generalized models and moved money in buckets into school districts under these formulas. And as part of that agreement that was struck in 2017, they said, we're going to give you more money from the state for basic education, only for the prototypical school funding areas. And I think we all know that that's not nearly enough to actually get to where we need to be. But at the same time, we're going to cut your local funding because we are taking more money from the general public in property taxes and on the state side, so we're going to lower your property taxes under the local levies, which your voters have approved for your schools, and we're doing that by law. So when the Tacoma School District went out in February and asked its voters for a maximum amount, hoping that the legislature would provide additional flexibility in that arena, and they didn't, we went out for $77 million, but down the road, we're only going to be able to collect less than 55% less, 45% of that. So that's about $38 million, give or take. There is a huge funding problem, in my estimation, that the legislature still needs to address. That while we got a one-year benefit under this $12 million allocation, it is not an ongoing amount of money. It was a one-year allocation to Tacoma because they recognized Tacoma in particular was hit the hardest among the districts under these formulas. They still need to work on that, but there's nothing that says that they're going to fix that. There is nothing that says in the future, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, we'll continue to get any allocations of that nature, nor is there anything that says we will get any reprieve under the enrichment levy structure that's in place. We're going to have to keep arguing for that, and I hope that our partners in the education community in Olympia will continue to argue along with us for those things. But that's not what we have right now. What we got was, and thank goodness, thank heaven for the legislators here in Tacoma who stood up on behalf of Tacoma and said, we're not going to vote this thing out of here. We're not voting on a budget unless Tacoma gets taken care of for this particular biennial period, which they did. Carla was right there when the legislators said, we know Tacoma's got a problem, we're going to help you fix that. But my head explodes too, Director. But I'm always hopeful that there is, there's always another legislative session. There are opportunities for us to show that what we do really, really well here at the Tacoma School District. And because we do it really, really well, the legislators do take notice, and they were willing to help us out. So we'll continue to work with our education partners on all these issues as we go forward.
I appreciate that. One last question. When you talk about these bills that one view in the House and one view in the Senate, and when we talk about fixing things, because it's a fallacy. They robbed Peter to pay Paul, right? It's a ledger fix. It's a gimmick. They didn't put more money into the system.
Yeah, they moved it from one savings account.
Yes, they slid it over.
Same amount of money.
Yeah.
That word swap.
They just moved it over. So if we're going to truly get a fix next year, it's a full session. They got plenty of time. If they felt pressed for time this year, I would have been happy with them going into overtime, because they've had no problem extending sessions in the past for a variety of issues. But are you finding, so those districts, what I wonder, and I appreciate if we've had good advocacy from our Pierce County delegation, and then it's a matter of other members from other districts who maybe are disproportionately benefiting from property rich versus property poor. So is this a partisan divide, or is this a geographic, I'm going to go advocate because it's a good deal for my constituents, and that's the people that put me in office, and that's what I'm elected to do, rather than, because we heard, well, we got it mostly right for 294 school districts, and yet we're the one that they love to tout. And if they think they've fully funded basic education, I would ask them to ask our teachers that buy granola bars and pencils and all sorts of stuff out of their pocket if we're funding the basic needs of students. So as we think about our strategy going forward, it seems to me that it's more complex than just partisanship.
You are exactly right. It is more complex than partisanship. This is not a Republicans versus Democrats issue. Nobody has a corner on caring about education in the political party system. I think that a lot of it gets down to, you're right, geographic location, the means that some parts of the state have for providing more for their communities than others. It's important to recognize that we live in a very vibrant and economically strong part of the state here in the Puget Sound, all throughout the Puget Sound. There are other parts of the state that are experiencing up to 10% unemployment rates, and their economies are not as strong. A lot of them are natural resource economies, and it's not just Eastern Washington. You don't have to go very far. Just go over to the peninsula over here, down toward the down toward Grace Harbor. It's rough over there, and so the legislature is trying to. The fascinating thing about the legislature is that you have a lot of people who come from all parts of the state, and they bring their own experiences into the legislature, and that those experiences help to shape the policy of the state. Some districts did win. Some districts have. Some districts came out better than others. Some districts have the means to provide more. I think that as we go forward in the coming years, the overall desire, in my opinion, of the legislative body is to provide equitable funding for education among every citizen in the state of Washington. And how they get to that, it's not perfect yet. They're going to have to keep working on it. The formula they have now has its shortcomings, and it's demonstrated very forcefully by Tacoma School District with its 28,000 plus students, high free and reduced lunch rates, and the property values that we have. Yet we have very supportive community who says, we value education so much that we're going to give that to you, Tacoma, so you'll get us the 86% so that my child can be better than I have had it. The proposal that was floating through the House of Representatives wasn't just for Tacoma. It benefited over 55 different districts. And fascinatingly, we were the only really large district in that whole list. There are over 55 districts that experienced more than a 55% cut in their enrichment funding, their local levy funding, along with LEA. That cannot be ignored, and those districts are smaller districts in more rural areas. So you're right, it's not a partisan issue. It can be a geographic issue. It can be a function of just general property wealth, whether you're a natural resources area or not. But I guess what I'm trying to convey is that while your head explodes and my head explodes,
And mine and everybody
the legislature's been honestly trying to deal with this for a number of years with the Supreme Court breathing down its neck, and they have announced that they are not done yet. So there is still opportunities for us to work
Well,
together.
Charlie, I appreciate you down there fighting the good fight for us. I find it
Thank you.
ironic that the district that a lot of those legislators like to tout as the innovative and the performance, and yet they want to tie our hands on how we innovate and perform. So thank you very much.
If I could comment on just my experience going back to the early, when the first school funding issue arose, and in the state budget office at that time, and that was 1974. Governor Evans tried to put more money in, and my boss to head that off, and he did keep that legislature there 275 days. And having been the lobbyist for the governmental affairs person, in addition to another job from OFM and stuff, what I saw was that, then the Doran decision came down telling them they had to fund basic ed, and they weren't funding it. That was the first McCleary. They came back, legislature came back, and I was working as a consultant with Wallace Miller, and we wrote the funding report on the funding of K-12 education in the state of Washington, 1981. Legislature made some big mistakes that 2 years also. They came out with a salary schedule very similar. It's almost kind of like the cartoon Yogi Bear, deja vu all over again. And they played with the levies. Tacoma got messed over. And what I have found during that period of time watching again is that the legislature pendulum swings and then it comes back. And they came back in '83 and basically said, okay, we'll do a prototypical school model and we'll see if that works, and if it doesn't. And to be honest, they've never really funded that prototypical school model to the extent that they were supposed to. I guess is what I'm saying is I see them having experienced this at least 2 different times with legislators, and it wasn't Democrat, Republicans, what Charlie said, it was Eastern Washington, it was more geographical, suburban. But what the legislature did recognize, and the change that they make, legislative change is usually incremental. I see them really addressing these issues come January. They have to. They are equity issues, and it makes your head explode. It makes mine, as you and I both well know. But on the other hand, what they did in '83 is they went back to allowing staff mixes, adjusting that, allowing districts to work on their own, things like tri-pay and things like that. And you know that we operate now on our levies with a grandfather. That's how they solved that. Tacoma lost a bunch of money, came back, and I see them, I don't know if that's what they will do, but I do know that some of them were pretty stunned when they saw, and not just ours. I've been down there. Charlie had me come down and talk with some people that I know who were former mayors from around the state who are now in the legislature, and they said, you know, we really did not, frankly, realize what was going on. We just wanted to get out of here, and that was an honest assessment. So I am confident that they're going to come back because they do want to do the right thing. I don't think there's anybody down there who doesn't, just based on past experience, that they will take up particularly these equity things, and for us. And that's the point that I had someone I ran into that I hadn't seen in a long time, and they were reading about this stuff, and they said, why would they do that to Tacoma? And I said, well, I don't think they did realize what they did, and now they know, and I really think that they are really concerned about fixing that for us, because we are referred to as Senator Murray School District. I don't think she would appreciate that, but for what we have done and what we have accomplished. So with Charlie's work that he does down there, and because I'm a dinosaur and people know what I was involved in, he invites me down every once in a while. And when the House Ways and Means Committee, when I testified and said we could have a $60 million hole, pencils went down and people looked up, and it was like, oh wow, we did not realize that with our $86 million levy and some other things that we aren't going to have anymore after it expires this year, and dropping down to that 38. It was pretty concise, and Charlie was there, and they kind of woke up, and it was like, wow. So I think I think we're going to have a longer session. We have a better opportunity to really get our message out, and they know that McCleary isn't perfect. Believe me, they do. So I am hopeful and confident that there are people down there that will do the right thing and begin to take care of the big issues, and then work. I don't know if they'll solve the capital budget one. That's always been a pain, but I think they will address the issues of the levy and the basic education funding formula.
I have a couple pretty simple questions and then 2 comments. And then I think, Ms. Medina, do you have a brief presentation that you wanted to piggyback on this with?
Yeah, it'll be brief.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my 2 questions are both about capital. With the school construction assistance program, I understand that there was some discussion about increasing the dollar per square foot match, but was there any talk about changes to the eligibility criteria? I understand that there were some changes in past years that resulted in Tacoma not being eligible for matching funds right now, but were there any discussions about changing eligibility, or was it all about the reimbursement per square foot?
No, there were included in the Senate proposal were eligibility modifications as well, because other school districts don't qualify as well, and it's a formula.
Mm-hmm.
The legislature runs on formulas. There was language in there that would, I believe, have helped, and we're going to have to keep working on that. Because it's important that when we went to the voters with the bond a couple years ago, we were expecting state match money, and we were telling the voters that. And if we're not qualifying now, we need to get that fixed so that we can keep the promise that we made with our voters when they said, yes, we want to build nicer schools, modernize our schools for our students.
Okay. And then my other question is also in the capital world. With regard to the conversations about the simple majority for bonds, was there interest in that conversation, or did they just run out of time? What was your sense of it? Is there will to go to a simple majority and they just couldn't work that out, or was it just not an option at this point in time?
Simple majority is one of the most politically difficult things for the legislature to do. it's my understanding that the 60% requirement came into place during the Depression era. And it was a way of trying to rein in spending from the state or at local levels by public entities, so that we could get through that period of great depression. And there was also at that time and I think it was probably about the same time that the local levy rates were a 60% majority as well. And over the course of time, as we've grown as a country, the 60% on levies was brought forward first to try and get that down to a simple majority, and that happened back in the late 90s, as I recall. It had to be the late 90s. And I recall that was one of the most difficult votes for a lot of people, because a vote like that tends not to play very well with your electorate, and people were essentially standing up and saying this is the right thing to do whether or not I get reelected. The simple majority for school bonds, we've been working on this on a bipartisan fashion, I have to argue, over the last couple of years, but it's still a difficult one. And it also, if you go to the simple majority, this is an interesting little quirk of it, if you go to the simple majority for school bonds, it also drives more money costs for the state in the capital budget, because more districts that pass these school bonds means a bigger draw on the school construction assistance program. And if your capital budget, which right now is around a $3 billion give or take budget, all of a sudden is going to have a run on its funding from passage of a bunch of school bonds, then your other capital programs, which are other state agency buildings, higher ed buildings, other capital projects, a lot that goes into some of the environmental programs that we do, by necessity are going to have to get cut unless they figure out a way of growing that capital budget. And so it's more complex, but there is a growing desire to get it done. I'll say that.
Thank you. And then my last comment is just, I think, for the board looking forward. I went to work at OSPI because of the prototypical school funding model, and I was there when we moved from the old funding formulas to a new. So I understand it pretty well. The thing that one of the parts that I'm most disappointed by with the legislature saying that they're done is the lack of movement on the health and social services line items of FT in the prototypical model. And as we all know, it takes nurses, it takes school psych, social work, it takes them all to make schools go and to support the needs of the whole child. So I don't think that there's probably any will right now for the legislature to think about adding to the prototypical model and committing more, like obligating themselves to more from a basic ed standpoint. But from a proactive perspective, I really think that one of our priorities should really be thinking about the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and thinking about maybe some collaborations between DCYF and the counties around, if there's going to be dollars that go to support children, youth, and families, there should be some consideration of local school districts' needs in that, looking at the districts who have the highest number of students experiencing homelessness, students in foster care, and really I feel like school districts should be in a leadership role around how those funds are allocated, if there are funds, and what the purposes of them are. I feel like Tacoma is in a really good position to say what we've invested in locally, and if there are any dollars that are outside of the program of basic ed, so it's not an ongoing basic education obligation. I feel like districts should be in a position to help be leaders on how those dollars are allocated and what the purposes of those funds are for.
I agree.
That's it. Thank you.
It'd be nice to get into that pot of money and help us out.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we'll have a couple words from Ms. Medina.
Okay, I really will be brief. I think that Director Vial and Charlie Brown have covered just about everything there is to discuss in my presentation. I hope to add maybe a point here and there. But really, this is illustrative of the conversation that we just had with them. First of all, it's our belief, and this is really developed in response to the study session that we had last week and the ability for us to be able to explain this to our public and to be able to start having that conversation with the legislature around what now happens next for us and what this means for us so that we can be clear about it and articulate it. So our expectation is that children deserve an equitable education, and the funding associated with that needs to be provided. What we're seeing right now is that each Tacoma student will receive almost $1,000 less than a King County student just because of where they'll be based in their living. And I don't mean to pick on Lake Washington. We pick them because they're a similar sized district. They'll be able to collect up to $2,500 per student. Tacoma, for just the levy, not the local effort assistance, Tacoma will be able to collect $1,350 roughly for their per student on the levy. So there's a big disparity in the amount of levy dollars that'll be associated. Lake Washington will receive the same state funding that we will, maybe with some adjustments based on their population distinctions with special education or ELL populations. But for the most part, they're going to be advantaged in a way that we will not have the opportunity to be advantaged. What we see is that it appears that we will have an increase in our revenues for the state funding, and we will have some level of increase in state funding moving forward. But what we're really finding when we get into that state funding is that a lot of it is based off of categorical programming or restricted type funds. So it's not free dollars, it's not like levy dollars that you can use to do whatever it is that you need to do. Our innovative programming, our free college prep tests as examples are the types of things that we leave in our levy. Those don't fit neatly into restricted funding. They don't go into CTE necessarily. They don't go into LAP. They don't go into bilingual. And so how are we going to be able to continue affording those? That's where levy dollars come in. So our new state levy limit is that we can collect up to $1.50 per thousand of assessed value. Our voters approved us to collect up to a little over $70 million. It actually ramps up. It starts at 70 and goes up to 78. So those green dollars that you see are the dollars that we're able to use to provide those innovative programmings and to provide those additional staffs that help to offset all of those whole child needs. What we're finding with that is in that red box, to get back to Director Hines' question of what the gap is, this is the start of the gap. So in 18-19, we'll get our green dollars, but that's still limited because we'll see a decline in our levy. Moving forward, the gap becomes in 1920 almost $14 million. In 2021, it increases, to $28 million. So those are the levy dollars that we are not able to collect that the state is limiting us on.
So that's the answer to your question. This year the gap is $12 million, but the hold harmless goes 12, 14 to 28. Now, part of that is what will be the response of the legislator for the next biennium. But as we see it, based on the tables that we're getting, the gap is going to be 12, 14 to 28 over the 3 years.
And if you look here, this slide is illustrative of, it incorporates what our local representatives, they fought hard to get us something, and we were able to provide for that $12 million in the 18-19 year. But you'll see that the 18-19 down to the 19-20, even with those additional levy dollars, is still a loss in revenue. What we want to make sure that we're clear on is our costs needed just to maintain whole child and whole educator supports will exceed our revenues. So we'll be in relatively good shape for 18-19 thanks to the $12 million. And then you'll see that the gap in expenditures, that red line, will increase beyond what the revenues that will be coming in from the state are. And that's just based off of legislative expenses that the state has already saddled us with. I call it saddled, sorry. It's probably a terrible choice of terminology, but that's going to be pension increases, benefit increases, another mandatory cost of adding K-3 teachers is included in that red line, as well as any negotiated increases that are already out there. That's included in that red line. And what it means for that difference between what the funding is and that red line is reductions in staff and programming in order to balance your budget. You'll have to bring that red line down to your revenues.
Okay. Do the, I think, was it maternity leave and paternity leave, those changes, are those included in there?
Right. So it's Senate Bill 5975, the Family Medical Leave Act revisions. The tax takes effect January of 2019. The ability to collect, to utilize those leaves won't happen until 2020, but we will start seeing an impact in the 18-19 year.
Okay.
Starting in 19, yeah. What we will be asking of the legislature is that ability to go up to $2,500 per student. Frankly, I'm not sure that that's the route that they will take or what the expectation will be, but at this point, we're approved up to that amount, and that's what we want to ask for from our legislators. And I would say that this is just the salient point to end it with. We don't believe that an equitable public education should be determined by the financial wealth of any community. So if you have any questions or if I can clarify anything, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions, Director Vial?
I don't have a clarifying question, but I think that somewhat answers the question that Director Hines and I have been looking at, is how big and how much is that going to be for what we're going to have to either get from the legislature or
Excellent.
not have what we think that we need to have in this school district to pay our teachers and to educate our kids. Yeah. And that's where I am, and I think your final statement is what this district is about, educating every child every day, no matter who they are and whether they are wealthy or whether they are not. They're going to get the same education that everyone else does. Thanks, Rosalind. Great quote.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments, Director Hines?
Yeah, thank you, Rosalind. I appreciate it. I know I've been hounding, and then you ask the question and be careful what the answer is, because it's terrible. And all of these things are interconnected. So I think about our capital projects, because I continue to get a lot of concerned constituents about security upgrades. Right? They want SROs, they want cameras, they want vestibules, they want metal detectors. You got to train people up. You got to, those are costs that typically we would have used levy dollars for. As we think about capital projects, do we have to shift? Would we put that into a capital project? And by the way, I love the fact that they're using Depression era policy in a 21st century global economy from a legislature that loves to talk about STEM and the importance of STEM, but let's use Depression era policy for a 60% majority. But I digress.
So I think your question is, how can you purchase security and surveillance type equipment in response to the needs of the community? Because we're anticipating
the need for another capital bond. Should we, because we're not going to have latitude in levy, should we begin to think about that in capital?
I believe that we have the opportunity to use capital levy dollars, capital dollars, both technology and building, and general fund dollars to support those needs. I think that we will have very little capacity within our capital building budget in order to accommodate those types of things. So we'll then have to worry about where in the general fund budget or in the technology budget that we help to support those activities.
Some of them are dependent, so not all of them can go as technology needs, as the example. So it would be
Correct.
a case-by-case situation.
With surveillance systems and that sort of thing.
So we might find ourselves in the predicament of, do we fund an innovative program or do we fund locks? Because I remember when we looked at locks previously, it was $1 million to rekey every lock in the district.
Correct. You're correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If I could comment. I was at a town hall meeting while some of the board was back in on gun control and all of those kinds of wonderful issues with Lori Jenkins, Jake Fye, and Congressman Kilmer. And one of the things that I brought up, the security, in the schools and what we're doing and the costs. And I said, we're going to be coming to the legislature, and they both shook their heads, yes. So I think that they're legislature probably planning on some kind of allocation, probably not a lot for some of our, I don't know how they're going to do it, but I got the impression that there was going to be some money put in for us to apply for, but it's probably not going to be enough to cover our, but, you know, that's the salient issue right now, and they were aware of it, and of course, you know, they're pretty, you know, they've been very, very supportive of us as a school district, and so I don't know, but that just seemed to be, and the governor mentioned that. I happened to be at a luncheon he held here a week ago, and he said, you know, we're going to have to put some money in for school safety and school security. So I suspect there will be something coming forward. I don't know how much and how far it will go, but at least I suspect that there'll be some allocation because it's the right thing to do. Anyway, that was a little inside knowledge there.
If there are no other comments, I want to thank you all for your presentations, and we'll move on to item number 7. Members of the public wishing to address the school board. And I'm glad to see so much of our public here tonight. And it's great to see all these children with you, too. Okay, so school board members encourage public participation. Your input is appreciated. If you'd like to address the school board, please follow these steps. First, complete a citizen's request to speak card, which is located at the back of the auditorium. Submit the card to the school board secretary prior to the start of the meeting. Cards submitted after the public comment period has ended will not be considered at this session. The superintendent will call your name when it's your turn to address the school board. Please speak into the microphone. You will have up to 3 minutes to share your comments, and you'll get a warning when there's 1 minute left.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your patience. We appreciate it. And Angel, I want to just thank you so much. It looks like we've got 8 salient speakers, and we appreciate that representing. I appreciate that so much. So number 1 is Daryl Finney, and second is Angel Morton.
Again, just as a reminder, the buzzard will go off, and you have 1 minute left.
Buzzard. Okay, buzzard. Okay. I'm actually going to cut this a little bit short because I hope you can hear me okay. After everything I've heard and so forth and all, it hasn't changed much on how I really feel. In the field of education and leadership, 2 things they have in common is that there's so many publications on each with different varying opinions on how things get done, except for education, talks about how we best serve people who are educating, and leadership, focuses on how we lead those to provide those services or manage, and we could debate that later. But you put them together, you end up with educational leadership at various levels. You have teacher leaders, building administrators, the district, school board, OSPI state, the state legislature, and now we have a partnership with the judicial system, who basically came out and said, this is what's needed, okay? We need to adequately fund public education. And the legislature said, okay, and said, okay, so here's what we can do. And so we all seem pretty happy on that portion that they've managed to provide so forth, which included money for teacher salaries. Now, I've come to you before to talk about, in part of being innovative and addressing every student every day, about making sure that students get what they need and require. In order to be successful in an environment where, our staffing and so forth, staffing in our buildings and so forth, still needs to be fixed at the state level based on the formula that they use. Because we still have the high schools that, still are dealing with large class sizes. We're dealing with a lot of new things that are coming aboard, tech. We're dealing co-teaching, other things that, supposed to save time, but really, anybody who's, started their life without a copy machine, now has one, knows that we're not really saving much time. So I want to say to you as educational leaders that you should know that taking care of students on a daily basis requires that you also take care of those people who are providing those services. Those people in the front line, in the classrooms, in the offices, and so forth. So the kind of leadership I like to see from you is not how to get more for less, like PRS does, but how you best take care of your educators so they can feel valued in a really demanding environment. as we go through our daily chores of working with students.
Thank you, Daryl. Angel Morton will be followed by Tammy Driscoll.
Thank you. Angel Morton, president of the 2,456 members of Tacoma Education Association. We've got about 6% here tonight, so good job, you guys. And I like to think that we have a great history of working with the district, and we all row in the same direction and work toward the same end goal. But tonight, I want to bring up a problem that we see growing. We're concerned about the spending priorities of Tacoma Public Schools. We've been researching using the published budget reports, and our research is showing that spending priorities have changed a lot in the past couple years. And I want to share a few examples with you. Tacoma, in the year 2016-17, devoted less spending to instructional programs than other districts of similar sizes. In the last 4 years, the district's shifting priorities have resulted in a loss to the instructional program of about $3.3 million, a loss to support programs of about $2.7 million, and a gain to administration of approximately $6 million. Certificated administrative staff grew 28.8% in the last 5 years. Over the past several years, spending on administrative needs has increased almost 30%, while spending on certificated needs has gone up 6%. This means that less money is going into our classrooms. Our district exists to support the needs of our students because that is where the magic happens. That is where the learning that drives our improved graduation rate happens. It can't happen without the work that these people are doing with their feet on the ground. This concerns us because we're in a time of teacher shortage. I saw a Twitter feed that says Tacoma is advertising their competitive wages, but I'm here to say that Tacoma is losing our competitive edge. When we look at salaries in nearby districts, there are 5 districts within a 5-minute drive, a 10-minute drive, where you can make the same or more at multiple points of your career. Those are smaller school districts that don't have the same problems that a large urban district has. So common sense would say, I'm going to go work for $3,000 more in Puyallup because I know they have a little bit easier student population. Our local legislators don't understand why Tacoma's struggling. Our allocations have gone up every year, and Tacoma ended last year with a $3.4 million reserve. We're asking the district to put their priority where the students are. Please work to attract and to retain educators because we need a stable workforce to get to 86% in the future. Thank you so much.
Following Tammy Driscoll is Jayla Waji. I'm sorry,
so
that was my
Tammy
best
now, right?
attempt.
Tammy now? Okay, don't start yet.
Yep, Tam.
All right, mine's more of a personal story, I think. But I started working for Tacoma Schools as a substitute, making $68 a day in 1990. That was 27 years ago. And I was hired 1 year later and started receiving $19,000 a year. And I thought I hit the jackpot until I started to try making my bills, and I decided I'd better probably get another job. I just paid my taxes on this month on the $81,000 I made last year, $72,000 after adjustments. Now, this is coming from someone who doesn't really understand the whole financial world, so excuse me if I have anything wrong here. But this is coming also from a parent who's trying to put her daughter through college that costs $30,000 a year. It also is going to be, it's overwhelming the $150,000 that I and my husband have to come up with for her to go to med school. We're a middle-class white family, and we don't get anything, to say the least. So along with paying regular bills, like everyone else, it takes a lot of mine and my husband's paychecks. So I drive Uber and Lyft 30 hours a week on top of teaching full-time, and my husband just took another job on top of his retirement from the Tacoma Police Department after 38 years, just to make ends meet. We have lived with not enough for a very long time. It breaks my heart to see my single-parent colleagues go without buying new clothes or a new pair of shoes for 4 years while their children go to college. It breaks my heart to see my colleagues choose to have a staycation or go camping because they can't and they don't have the money to go on a vacation out of state or out of country. They just don't have the cash flow. Or to watch a new hire advertise for a roommate last month because she doesn't have enough money to pay for even the cheapest apartment she found over in Parkland. As teachers, many times I hear, well, you know, you got into this line of work for the kids, or you got in this line of work so you wouldn't have to work in the summer. Well, in the last 27 summers, probably 24 of those, I've had an extra job. And to watch, I lost my place. In the 9 weeks that we have off, we make extra money, or we teach summer school to pay the bills, and we are working that second and third job in the summer time just to make ends meet, especially the male population. I know that they try to support their families so their wives can spend time at home with their children, and it's just not right. And I know you know that. I've heard a lot of wonderful things tonight, but I do have to say this last part. Apparently, this is the point where the state of Washington has given a significant amount of money to our district, like ours, or to all districts like ours, to bargain for and to actually receive. I want my peace, and I want a peace for my colleagues as well, and I want a peace for the young people that have come into the building to teach before they decide that there's better places to make more money, and before they realize the stress of the job is so immense and so intense that even Regents Blue Shield will not cover us any longer. They won't even bid on our contract to make our insurance their policy, which was awesome at the time that we had it. And our bodies are so ridden with sickness and ailments related to stress that I feel like we need a compensation for that to make us want to stay. Please make the right decisions and do what's right. For 30 years I've been patient and waiting. Please do the right thing.
Following Jayla is Aaron James.
Hi, I'm Jayla Waichi. I teach English at Foss High School. I want to approach this from a little bit of a different angle. To do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself for a minute, because I think that my personal story is a good example of what will face young professionals entering a changing field of education today. I taught for 10 years in high-poverty districts on the East Coast, and then spent 4 years out of the classroom training teachers on Common Core assessments. I came back to the classroom in Tacoma with a large pay cut by choice because of my passion for teaching in urban schools. I am the exception and not the rule, and unfortunately many teachers leave every day for various reasons. That said, I do have a way to supplement my income. In fact, I just made $1,000 this week for only 15 billed hours writing content for a large ed tech company while sitting on my couch. Think about that. I made a week's teacher salary in less than half the time and without any of the extreme physical, emotional, or intellectual drain. In fact, I get messages from recruiters on LinkedIn on a regular basis. Speaking of ed tech companies, Amazon, right up the street, entered the education arena recently and are quickly becoming a real disruptor in the industry. Average salary at Amazon is $110,000 a year, by the way. If you want to retain and recruit other teachers who would be rated as distinguished, because that's what we want in our classrooms, there has to be competitive pay. The field of education is changing, and graduates and veterans have options. Lots of options. Options that still help kids, but have significantly more pay. Competitive pay keeps people like me. It keeps people working in our direct community. It keeps people with a livable wage in the fastest growing zip code in the United States. Where there's a will, there's a way. You can find a way to pay.
Following Aaron James is Liz Fortson.
Hello, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak in this forum. I appreciate the rock and the hard place that you seem to have found yourselves in. But I am here today to advocate for my students, my children. Because after all, that is the sole reason we are here. We're here for the students. When one goes to the TPS website, a worldwide face for the district, they see Ever Student Every Day, inspired teaching, learn about our world-class teachers. Words to support the message that TPS puts students first. A message that was a huge factor in my move from Federal Way Public Schools, where I have wonderful memories of working with Mr. Garcia, Forrest Creek, Marie Verhar, and I moved down to Tacoma to teach at Mount Tahoma. The reality, however, is this. I was told yesterday that of the 2 teachers leaving my department, only 1 is going to be replaced, which means I will be the sole chemistry teacher teaching 9 classes worth of students in only 4 periods. That's over 60 kids a class. Of 15 and 16-year-old children in a chemistry class. Where I don't have enough seats for 32 students. So I'll be doing it college style, which gives them the opportunity to see what college will be like in the presentation room. I asked the district on behalf of my students and the rest of the students that go to school in our district to let your actions speak louder than your words, because they do, and to put your money where your mouth is. The state has confirmed that TPS has been provided millions in funding to be in a place financially to keep up with salary changes happening in surrounding districts, and to fund another person from my department. Perhaps, so I've listened to what you have said tonight, and perhaps using the money on FTE for new teachers rather than 18 new positions at CAB would be appropriate. I realize it's a tough decision, but our students are worth that tough decision. Our students deserve, we've heard, an equitable education. Right now, we can't keep teachers at what you guys are paying. The last statistic I saw, 50% of brand new teachers don't finish their first year of teaching. How are we going to attract teachers? How are we going to keep teachers so that our children get what they deserve, the best possible education? Please stop treating teachers like stray dogs happy to just be getting scraps. High quality teachers, high quality educators, the kind that our students deserve, are not a dime a dozen. So please do not forget the reason you are here. Provide the best for our students.
Following Liz Fortson is following Liz Fortson is Donna Hawes.
Good evening. On the Tacoma School District website, it says that our strategic plan is annual budgets that reflect the district's prioritized goals. That's a very disconcerting statement because we don't feel like your prioritized goal. We feel dismissed and marginalized. We don't feel like you value us, and you've shown that. Your core values are students first, results matter, transparency. Students first, the model should be trickle up, and what we walk day to day is trickle down, and we get the scraps. The decision should be based on our needs in order to appropriately serve the students. Based on the evidence you present, the decisions are made by your bottom financial line. As long as that is the order of business, we are all doomed. Dr. Santorno, we are your job security. It seems like you would value us a whole lot more than you have shown you do. There is no evidence to back up your rhetoric. I have an assignment for you all. Get a big bucket, put all our names in it and where we teach. Take turns with all your directors and everyone down here. Draw a name. Come to our classroom, not with all the hubbub of who you are, as a teacher. Make a lesson plans and teach in our classrooms for 3 days. And I think that if you truly put your money where your mouth is, after 3 days in our classrooms, your prioritized goals will change.
Following Don Haas is Laura Nickel.
As a young boy growing up in rural eastern Washington, my dad served on the local school board for over 20 years. I distinctly remember Dad coming home from contract negotiations complaining about those darn teachers always wanting more money. I hope you understand, as a good German farmer, my dad did not use the word darn. Instead, he chose a more colorful word to express his deep frustration. You can well imagine my dad's surprise years later when 2 of his 4 children became grade school teachers and was eventually joined by a daughter-in-law who became the 3rd teacher in the family. It was then that my dad started to receive his own education. His views about teachers' compensation quickly evolved. Dad was amazed how we would return to visit with book bags filled with student papers to grade, administration forms to fill out, report cards to complete, and lesson plans to create. He quickly stopped complaining about those darn teachers. Before long, he was complaining about those darn school board members and wondering why they didn't respect how hard teachers work and how much teachers give to their students. With all due respect, my dad would be ashamed of the stipend that you are offering us. This year, Stanley Elementary was recognized as the #1 school in South Puget Sound by the Puget Sound Business Journal, a magazine I'd never heard of before. My fellow coworkers at Stanley and all the coworkers across the district work hard each day to provide a quality education for all our students. We give our best because the students deserve the best. Now it is time to give your best. In the words of my dad, I believe he would say to you, respect your teachers, honor their hard work, and give them the compensation they deserve. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Nickel. I'm in my 4th year of teaching ELL at Baker Middle School. 5 years ago, I took out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans right after I had finished paying off my undergrad to go to grad school so that I could get a master's degree in education because I wanted to be a highly qualified teacher. I wanted to be good at my job. Of everyone in my PLU cohort, almost half of them have left the profession, and I really can't blame them. Some of us can barely afford to make our student loan payments and still pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever on a teacher's salary. This past year alone, my building had a turnover of 14 staff members. It seems there are constantly more and more hoops that teachers are told to jump through with less and less incentive to jump. If we say we are all about what's best for students, why can't we recognize that happy, well-supported teachers make for happy, well-supported students? I fail to understand how we as a society expect things to get better if we can't even manage to retain the talent. But if happy and well-supported is not our reality, why should anyone want to stay? I really love my students. I adore them. But I am so stressed out all the time, and I do not believe that being a teacher means that I also need to be a martyr.
Again, I just want to thank you all for being here tonight and for your comments. And with that, we'll move on to...
Do you want to take a little break for them to leave?
Oh, we'll take a couple of minute break just for you all to clear the room before we progress to the next item on our agenda.
If you want to stay.
Stay.
Yeah.
Stay if you want.
Thanks, Rosalind. We'll take a 4-minute break. We'll resume in about 1 minute.
Nice driving there. I like the stress of driving. I'm trying to car.
We actually lost members. We lost our quorum. Although we gathered in as a quorum, we could continue.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started again in 1 minute. 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started again. We're going to call back to order. Thank you.
Move on to item number 8 on our consent agenda. This has Director Y'all here to receive.
There it is. There we go. Okay. I think I'm back on. Okay. Moving on to item number 8, consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Oh, go ahead, Director Hines. I'll second it.
So moved.
Okay. Second.
Are there any questions about items on the consent agenda? Okay. All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Moving on to item 9, policy matters. 9.1, second reading, policy 6105, federal funds financial management.
This is, I think we can read it. I'll read it. The General Counsel and the Chief Financial Officer recommends that the Board of Directors adopt Policy 6105, Federal Cash Management.
Move adoption.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions about item 9.1? All those in favor of adopting the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Item 10, quarterly financial update. Presentations on the financial health of the district will be made during regular board meetings on a quarterly basis. Monthly financial statements can be found on the district's website at tacomaschools.org, and then to About, and then to Finance. Item 11, curriculum and instruction, and there are no curriculum instruction matters tonight. Item 12, business matters. 12.1, approval of interlocal agreements with Bremerton and Central Kitsap for the 2017-18 school year.
The Deputy Superintendent, on behalf of the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services, requests the Board to approve the interlocal agreements with Bremerton and Central Kitsap School Districts, funding source special education.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions about item 12.1? All those in favor of adopting the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Item 13, other business. 13.1, approval for prioritization of 2013 capital bond projects.
The Chief Operating Officer recommends that the Board of Directors prioritize the use of the 2013 capital bond funds to construct Hunt Middle School ahead of Downing Elementary.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Any questions or comments about item 13.1?
I'd just like to add, the study session last week was very helpful, so thank you for walking us through that, and to reiterate the outreach to Downing to make certain that we're including administrators, teachers, students, and parents in the conversation about if we're not able to build a new school now, what are some enhancements that we can add in the interim?
To date, I know our staff has been very proactive. We've met with the principal, and the principal's had conversations with her staff and teachers. Next steps is a meeting plan with the PTA.
Okay, thank you.
For members of the public, in addition to what Director Hines said, I encourage, if you want more context about this motion and vote, I encourage you to watch that study session presentation just to have more context about our overall bond. Director Vial?
Yeah, I'd also like to thank Chris for the work on this and going back, looking at numbers and the fact that Hunt has been on 2 bonds and hasn't been rebuilt, and the large population increase in that area, as our demographer pointed out to us. And I also want to thank you for reaching out to Downing. I mean, I walked into that school in 1949 as a little first grader the day that it opened, so it has a deep spot in my heart. Grew up 5 blocks away, and that reaching out and working with them, and I know that neighborhood, and they will understand, because a number of the kids that live over there may want to attend Hunt, as the 2 middle schools, as we now know in that area, are crowded, and Hunt's not that far away. But I just thank you and Morris for a breath of fresh air now in your department, and your willingness to step outside the box as what normally goes on with construction people. Go meet with parents, go with principals, and be willing to go the extra mile to figure out how we can get this done in an age of where, as we mentioned earlier, we were promised $700 million match, and we got, I believe, about 200, if we even got that much. I can't remember from the state, but there was a big, as Director Hines says, a big delta there about what we were promised and what we did not get. So I just want to compliment you and Morris on an amazing job that you've done since you came on board. Thank you.
Thank you, but just to be politically correct, we have a strong team behind me and Morris that, do a lot of the legwork, so I greatly appreciate what they do.
Yeah, leadership sets the tone, and I know you have a great team too, so thank you.
Any other comments? So motion has been moved, motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is adopted. Item 13.2, approval of total project budget increase and change order number 026 with Absher Construction Company for the Wilson High School replacement and modernization.
Move adoption.
Second.
Oh, I think
Oh, I messed up.
I'll read it real quick.
I
The
think
Chief
we're voting
Operating
for
Officer
one.
recommends that the Board of Directors approve Absher Construction Change Order Number 026 for the Wilson High School Modernization Project.
It's been moved and seconded. Are any questions?
I'm going to add another comment. I appreciate we're getting into a better rhythm of giving us information ahead of time so that when we set up on the dais, we've already done our due diligence. It makes it a lot easier than in the past. It was we would get the presentation, the information the same day that we were expected to take a vote, which makes it really challenging to vet it. So thank you again for providing this information in advance.
Any other comments? All those in favor of adopting the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Item 13.3, acceptance of 2015-17 Energy Efficiency and Solar Grant Program Award from the Washington State Department of Commerce.
The Chief Operating Officer recommends that the Board of Directors accept the 2015-2017 Energy Efficient and Solar Grant in the amount of $350,000.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments?
Just a question. Is this a competitive grant? How certain are we of getting this?
We are going to receive the funds. We were working in conjunction with a consultant for all our capital projects. If we could obviously construct certain components of it, we receive money from the state. So we're going to receive these funds.
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of adopting the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Item 13.4, approval of Foss High School softball field design.
The Chief Operating Officer recommends that the Board of Directors authorize the superintendent and/or designee to award the contract to D.A. Hogan for the new softball field at Foss High School in the amount of $121,200 plus tax.
Move approval.
Second.
Any questions or comments about the item? All in favor of adopting the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Item 14, report to the board. And tonight we have a biennial urban collaborative report by Mrs. Trotwood.
Good evening. You will notice the same flow of the report that we have had in numerous reports, whether it be the quarterly or the semi-annual reports. So it should be a familiar format to you, and I will go through and share highlights with you this evening. I do want to take a quick moment to make sure and introduce Directors John Bell and Stephen Mondragon in the room here this evening, as they are the two leading this work at the secondary and the elementary level. Thank you, John and Stephen. And I can't help but thank Jay Sneller's in the room. Superstar school psych, so thank you, Jay, for your work. So here we have is just a snapshot of our timeline at a glance for you. The full timeline at a glance is included in your report and will be posted online tomorrow for all to review. This is where we keep track of the activities that we have completed each year, as well as what are the pieces that we continued to work on. We know when the Urban Collaborative team came to the school district, we asked the question, how long will it take for us to see? And we were told 5 to 10 years. So we've got 8 years represented on here, and we'll continue plugging away at that and updating for you. The next couple of slides, I'm going to highlight some of the actions since our last reporting in October. This one here focuses on the professional development. We know professional development is the major way to create change in a system. Our student services instructional facilitators plan and lead monthly professional development with our teachers. We have 4 different professional learning networks at our elementary and secondary level. They are focused on co-teaching, effective instructional practices, behavioral supports, and autism. We also work in collaboration with our teaching and learning department with the BEST grant. That's one you've heard Assistant Superintendent Verhar speak of before. We have a number of new special education teachers, and we match them up with high-quality mentors. Again, focused on professional development, we are spending a significant amount of time planning the summer and the PD for professional development for the 18-19 school year. Keeping with professional development, recommendation number 10 addresses the identification and the eligibility of dually identified students for special education services and for English language development. In the last few months, we've worked in collaboration with our ELL department to provide professional development for staff. On this slide here, you can find the 5 objectives that were identified for this professional development. The professional development was offered in 3 two-part series. We had approximately 20 staff members per session attend, and we specifically targeted our schools with a high ELL special education population. And the audience that we targeted for this professional development were our ELL teachers and our special education teachers, along with our school psychologists and our speech-language pathologists, as they are critical members of the evaluation team for eligibility. Recommendation number 11 addresses the instructional materials and technology. We have inventoried our instructional resources across our classrooms and listened to our teachers share their needs for materials and assistive technology. We've attended presentations at the Urban Collaborative Conference. Director Winskill, you attended a number of those with us alongside in November. Those are very informative to us as they are resources that are vetted. In addition, then we talk to other school districts. We inquire about the progress and what were their learnings in the implementation in their school district to help inform us. We are currently finalizing and outlining rollout plans specifically to focus on our autism and developmental classrooms at the elementary and secondary level, and then our elementary literacy interventions we are looking at for the 18-19 year. We're developing next level and long range planning for the rest of our student needs, and we'll be vetting these plans with our newly forming teacher advisory. And of course, since it's advisory, we'll be taking their input and adjust as appropriate. So I'm going to move into a couple of slides with data. Many of these are familiar, and I'm excited to share the updates of these data pieces for you. This first slide here we shared in the past, and we are again continuing to show the incremental progress. You will see the access and the participation in the general education classes increasing for students with disabilities. Our department goal is to have 65% of students with disabilities participating in the general education classrooms 80 to 100% of the school day. You might say, why those numbers? They're the federal numbers that we report to annually to the state and then ultimately to the federal government. So that's why we use those numbers. We work with our building teams to analyze the learning for students across our classrooms, specifically looking at the failing grade data, benchmarks, and our iReady data to monitor the effectiveness. We know it's not just about a place. Is it making a difference for our students? In the next slide here, we've broken this down by level into the elementary, the middle, and the high. Again, you can see the improving incremental trend, with elementary having the greatest success overall, which is no surprise. Maybe I say that because I'm an elementary teacher. No, I say that the gap is smaller at the elementary, and just the sheer structure of it does lend itself to reach that goal more quickly. We do work with the individual buildings to specifically target their next moves, to have the conversations, to specifically go student by student. I hope that I've continued to emphasize in each and every one of these reports, this is not a move all students all at once and all students all the time into the general education. It always must be a student by student decision by the IEP team. The building teams look at each individual student, they look at their learning, and they work to help guide the teams to plan schedules so they're going to be most supportive and to really maximize the opportunities for the inclusive. The next piece we're going to look at here, actually the next 3 slides are looking at the co-teaching. So the first slide here was increasing the number of schools and classrooms where we're implementing co-teaching. We've been working with professional development to support co-teaching at the secondary level for the last several years. So here we can see that we met the goal for our number of schools, and we continue to make progress towards a number of classes. We know that this practice must be supported with professional development, so we provide that annually, as well as through, I mentioned that we do a monthly PLN, a professional learning network, to work on the problems through each month that teachers can come in and seek support with, as well as provide resources from ASCD. While we're excited about the progress we've made making the intentional planning and the professional development to support teachers and administrators, it truly is each individual student. So then that takes us to our next slide and looking at the number of students. So numbers in schools and classrooms is one thing, but how many students are we impacting? So we see here, this year we're up to 870 students at the all at the secondary level in a co-teaching classroom. That has been a steady increase, you can see, from 2015, where we are at 230. So now students have a place in the general education, and now we're looking at the effectiveness for students. It's not enough just to be there. We want every student to be learning at their highest level. We're analyzing their grades and using a walkthrough protocol to monitor the effectiveness and guide feedback. As a reminder, co-teaching was a recommendation in the Urban Collaborative report under inclusive education. And the last data slide, the last data slide we're going to look at is the academic rigor. So this one's another one that, just look at that improvement over time. I'm amazed by that, and I'm so happy for our students to go from 5.2% in 2014 up to 27.6% in 2018. I thank you as a board for setting this as a benchmark and for calling it out for each and every student. It's an all-time high, and now we really need to look at how are our students performing there. That really is the piece. We want to make sure that students are being challenged and having success. We're working with the DART team to monitor the success in these courses. So our key findings, just quickly summarize these for you, and that TPS continues to improve the access of students with disabilities participating in the general education classes at the highest level on record for district. Co-teaching is improving opportunities for more students to access more rigorous curriculum. And Tacoma Public Schools juniors and seniors with disabilities are accessing AP, IB, college and the high school, and Running Start at record levels. We thank you for your leadership with that. So our next steps, we've got a lot. I've just touched on a few of these here. So I'm going to touch on the professional learning networks. We will continue to work away with those each and every month, working to encourage our teachers to come to the sessions, to provide that support for them, to look at the data together, to help develop action steps. We're planning our summer professional development. We are updating our curriculum materials and the complementary professional development that teachers are going to need to implement those materials in their classrooms with fidelity and with effectiveness for each and every student. We have a committee that's been meeting on recommending literacy intervention for curriculum materials at the elementary level for 18-19. Again, we're going to vet that with our teacher advisory as one of many ways. We're working closely with DART. It's an opportunity for us to communicate some of our data needs and refine those to really monitor the effectiveness for the communication with our buildings and to drive the action to improve outcomes for students. Special education teachers continue to serve on committees for the prioritization of standards and in the development of the intervention framework. Some of the highlights. That concludes tonight's report. Our next report, semi-annual report, will be in October, and we will provide updates at that time. I thank you for your continued support, and I'll take the opportunity for any questions or anything that I can be responsive to your needs tonight.
There are questions from the board? I'll just start and go down. Director Vial.
I was looking in the appendix, and one of the things that I really like to see is the amount of kids now attending neighborhood schools, and I'm sorry I had to step out, but I think that's critical, then the kids in the neighborhood feel like they're a part of what goes on. I've seen it in my own neighborhood. A couple of special ed kids that were being bused off to other schools are now attending the neighborhood school. And I think that as we look at the key findings here about, where we are in the increases and where we started is really amazing. And I would, as we go forward with data collection and so on, are we going to be looking at DART, for example, of looking at how these children do academically when they're in their own neighborhood school versus when they're not? I would be interested to see if that factors out for academic improvement, and also probably discipline issues too. Are we looking at, as we develop a better data collection system, is that something, I'd like to see that, I don't know if anyone else does, but is that something that you're looking at as you work with DART, is refining the data collection and the correlations?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you know, Zken's very responsive and communication several times a week in terms of what we need and how to get very granular.
So I know that we've done some of that work at the high school level in terms of the gen ed kids and the sped kids that are in the co-teaching classes. All of them have done better academically that way. And I would just be interested in if there's a way to look at that data to see if that decision to keep kids in their own neighborhood results in better academics and better discipline stats, because I know our discipline stats aren't really where we want them to be yet. Am I correct?
You are correct.
And that's my only suggestion. I mean, otherwise, and having had the opportunity this year to attend the conference for a part of a day with Superintendent Santorno, the National Conference on Urban Collaborative, I can tell our people that are watching and people in our district that we are pretty much light years ahead of some of the other school districts in this. And it is in the country. They were sitting there and I was sitting with a group of people from Texas, and they kept saying, how do you do all this? How do you do this? And Jennifer, Carla presented, and Scott, Rich. And so anyway, sometimes we don't take a step back and see how good we really are. But those are the only two comments, the one on upping the neighborhood. And I would be interested in seeing if there is a correlation between the academic improvement for the kids who do go to school in their own neighborhood.
Thank you. I will follow up accordingly.
Thank you.
Dr. Winskill? Okay, so I wanted to look at two programs in particular, and that is autism and developmental classes. So we are trying to integrate them. So let's look just at elementary for the purposes of time. So when they're integrated in the regular classroom, is there a maximum number that you put with a teacher? And I want to know about also para-educators support in the classrooms.
It's driven by each individual student needs. We're trying to be very thoughtful about our classrooms and the impact in, and so that's something that we've had to be thoughtful as we locate our programs, because we know the smaller the schools, the greater the impact can be. So there's between what the numbers are at the time of day, and again, not every student from a self-contained classroom is spending some time in the general education classroom. So, and when we need to make sure and have support go with any student, that either comes from the program support from the classroom or from one-on-one para support.
So is it possible that there would be no paras in a classroom and quite a few students? Is that a possibility?
It is a possibility if the team has identified that the student does not need that level of support. It's a team decision on it. I'm going to tell you that does not happen very often.
Okay.
We have high levels of para support across our system.
Well, I know
I'm happy to share some of that data as well.
Yeah, and so I know that it's a big expense, but if somebody feels like it is difficult for them to handle a class like that, maybe they're a new teacher, perhaps, I guess they go to their principal. Do they go to the special ed people at the district level and talk to them? What should be their steps?
Usually both. It's a conversation around what is the student going to need, and usually what that looks like, Director Winskill, is a para goes with to start, and then you take your data and you fade out. It is very rare that you're taking a student from a self-contained classroom and having them move in without any support.
It would be more other students that may have the autism identification, not from a self-contained class that could be without para support.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Hines?
Thank you for the report. I was just taking a walk down memory lane, and it's hard to believe that we're in year 7 of an 8-year plan. Director Vial and I were newly minted school board members when we undertook this, and it was one of Superintendent Santorno's first initiatives, and it was a part of being vulnerable, talking about we have some historical systemic problems with the way that we have attempted to educate kids that had special education needs. So I applaud your diligence, because you've been in there for this journey. There's a way to go. I echo Director Vial's concern around the discipline numbers. I think we're making progress. There's a lot of indicators that we're making progress, but I don't want us to get to the year 8 and then we've accomplished everything we've set out to accomplish. So I'm going to be interested as we get towards that 8th year for you to educate us on what does life after that 8th year formal plan look like, so we can stay ahead of it and keep making strategic investments of resources and policy if we need to advocate at the state or federal level, because I am confident that we're going to continue to improve educational outcomes for kids in Tacoma. I've asked this question before, and I'm going to ask it again, and it's a softball for you. When we talk about AP classes, so the last time I said, I'm a benchmark person, I like to know how we're doing against other districts. What do the numbers look like for kids, special education students taking AP type classes in other districts? And you told me you had no data because in most districts they don't allow special education kids to take AP classes. Where are we now?
I have no other information that would support otherwise. I will continue to check with my colleagues on that.
So I would be interested if we could, we're a learn and share organization, if there's a way that we can reach out to more districts to talk about the benefit. And I often tell the story of the young man at Lincoln that took the AP biology class.
Zach Jenkins.
That we all cried.
Yeah, you showed us the video while we're sitting up on the dais and we all just start bawling our heads off. But that's what it's about. It's about a young man feeling validated who may need some assistance in other areas of his educational, but we get away from the educational experience, but we get away from the generalizations and stigmatizing of kids. And to listen to his classmates talk about Zach was powerful. So thank you for your good work on this, and I appreciate the report.
Thank you. I couldn't do it without your support. As a follow-up piece with that, Director Hines, is that we do have the Washington Urban Collaborative members. We're up to 14 districts, and we meet quarterly, and I will be with a great number of them next week in San Antonio at the conference, and I will continue. As they push on me, I push on them as well, so I'll check in with them on their AP status.
And perhaps we could think about at WASDA doing a presentation where we share our learnings and see if we can inspire more people to take these similar actions.
And I think it's important to note that, that Jennifer started that cohort, and she's grown it from, just Tacoma to 14. That's all on her, building that.
Thank you. Dr. Hines, do you have additional questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Director Vial, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I do, and it's really not a question. Like it was about a week or so ago, one of my alma maters, Washington State University, announced that they were starting a 2-year college program for kids with autism and Down syndrome. And I wondered if we were going to look into that, because one of the things that we have on our list is post-secondary transition, about getting that inroads into that partnership with them, so that perhaps some of our kids can actually attend a university for 2 years. And so I guess I'm asking to have us look into that in a hurry, and it's maybe Dr. Garcia, you and I could help with that a bit, and both Cougs. So, but I saw that, and I saw a number of parents immediately say what a wonderful post-secondary opportunity for kids. So I would like to, since we have been groundbreakers in getting our kids places, I'd like to ask to have us look into that, and maybe Superintendent Santorno, you and Dr. Garcia have some ties, and see if there's when it starts, and about a way to have, some of our kids get in that program. So
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I had not heard that one.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. The first one's about the timeline at a glance, and it's not about what's on the timeline, it's about what's not on it. And this builds off of a comment that both Director Vial and Director Hines made. The one thing that's not here in terms of measuring the whole child is safety. So I wasn't here when this urban collaborative work got kicked off, so I'm just wondering why the work on closing kind of discipline gaps for students with disabilities and some of the other safety benchmarks aren't addressed under this umbrella here.
Yes.
Or maybe there weren't recommendations in the report that was the catalyst for this, but why haven't we or will we plan to work this under this umbrella?
Yes, that is part of it. There was one recommendation about timeout logs, and forgive me on you've got a snippet of it on this, and then you've got the full in that should be in your packet for you. There was only one, Director Mondragon asked me the other day specifically about the exclusionary discipline, and it really had me digging back into this 122-page report much more so, and finding it right in there. And so while we know we report on the exclusionary discipline in our KPI report, and so we are going to be preparing the 36-week one before we know it. It did not come out in a recommendation, but there's a way for us to link it. I believe it was in the accountability recommendation. I will make sure and follow it and specifically call that out in the KPI report.
And Jennifer has been, I think, very adamant about when our benchmark reports are given. And there have been a couple of reports where there was not a report of what was going on with our students with disabilities, and she's called that out and said, hey, we need to make sure we add that and get those numbers in there. So it's been, it has been added to a part of our benchmark reports.
Yeah, I just think that making progress in that area, it seems like all of the work that you've done under this umbrella of the Urban Collaborative already, all those pieces would work together. So it seems like it would be nice to get some more information about a plan moving forward in that area with these reports too. My other question was about the BEST mentorship for new special education teachers. How long is that mentoring support offered? Is it just year one? Is it year 1 through 3? What's the length of the mentoring support?
So it's been a camera's
Thanks.
on the way there. It's been a 1 year, and then it's changed when the funding has changed, and so we've been talking about how we can support our special education teachers for 2 years, and it's something that would have to be a locally funded. At present time, the BEST grant does not support preschool teachers or any of our therapists, our school psychs, and any of our teachers that are out of area. But those are pieces that are important to us in retaining our staff, so we continue to support staff. And we absolutely want to do a year 2 and a year 3. This year at the fall conference, as Director Winskill and Vial may recall, we did a problem of practice specifically on the teacher retention. While our data matches the national average for special education teachers, we have a desire to do better with that. And so tonight I referenced about a teacher advisory. That was something that has come out of that problem of practice, and then specifically around the mentoring support. So we absolutely want that to expand, and we would love the advocacy at the state level for additional support for the mentoring.
Okay. Thank you. And then another question I have is about the joint professional development objectives on slide 4. Item number 1, the focus on learning ways to distinguish language language needs from students who have special education needs. Since it's mentioned here as a point of professional development, that implies to me that it's a need.
Yes.
So is that a need, like for folks to really have better strategies for identifying those differences? And if it is a need, do we have a process for kind of looking back at students' identifications and making sure that they were really appropriately identified in the past?
Yes, so this recommendation comes out while some districts may be questioned if they're over-identifying. The question for us is, are we missing students? Are we missing students and identifying them? And so that was part of the training, was what are those look-fors and how to vet that through. So one of the things that we can do is we can use nonverbal assessments then to just eliminate the language issue there as well. So yes, so building teams, so that was a focus with, as I mentioned, for the professional development, was to bring in teams that have high numbers of ELL students in their buildings to really train them up on what are we looking for, so we don't miss children.
Okay. And then my last question is about just the diversity within our students with disabilities. Like, there's lots of disability categories, and then I don't have a good sense of the distribution among our kids, but that distribution would inform for me what I would expect to see in terms of the inclusion percentages. So I just wonder if you all, or if we have somewhere on our website, or if you all are looking at that data around kind of, or what you would expect in terms of types, disability type, and the extent to which a student is, the percentage of time students are in or not in the classroom based on disability type.
Yes.
And how that our distribution of our students impacts the percentages that we're seeing currently.
Yes, I'd be happy to provide that in a Friday report follow-up if that would meet the needs. Yes.
That'd be great, but I don't know if others are interested in how much work it would take you, but.
Give me a little bit of time. It is a piece that we do report on in our federal report, and specifically breaking down the correlation with the least restrictive environment is a piece I want to make sure and do a thorough and thoughtful job to provide to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That would be good to know.
Can I just add a little bit of context? If you forgive me in advance that they're not exact numbers, in 2016 or 17, there were 2,041 kids across the state that took at least one AP, IB, or college in the high school class across the state that are special needs students, that are identified special needs students. Approximately, we have in the high school population about 1,000 kids on a given year that are special needs students. If you take the 2016 numbers, or 17, 25%, 24%, it's about 250 kids. Do the math. Tacoma Public Schools has about 12 to 13% of the total population of special needs students taking classes at the state level. We don't represent 12 to 13% of the total population in the state of Washington.
I appreciate that, and with that, even and with that number too, that statistic too, the distribution of our kids and the types of disabilities they have, I would expect those kinds of figures too to be to impact those numbers too. So that would be very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Garcia. That's it for me. Any other last questions, comments? Well, thank you for your report.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you for your continued support for all students.
Okay, item 15, board comments or reports. I'll start with Director Hines.
Well, first I gotta give a shout out to my son Sam. This has been a long one. Thanks for hanging in there, dude. You should get extra credit in your civics class. 2 Fridays ago, we had an opportunity to go see Guys and Dolls at Stadium High School, and it was ridiculously good. Those kids, I think over 140 students that were involved in the production, and Liz Jacobson did an amazing job, and those kids were just beaming. And I ran into Enrique was there. His daughter was working as a stage manager, so it's cool to see those sorts of opportunities. And I guess more of, and I will be brief in the interest of time, but as we move forward, it was really great to have the teachers come out and share their perspective, and it's important because they are the boots on the ground making things happen. And my wife is a recovering high school English teacher who I was very interested to hear one of the teachers bring up Amazon, because Amy left teaching and went to work for Amazon. And we refer to those as the cot years, because she would call me at 2 a.m. and say, we're still working, I'm just going to sleep on the cot in my office tonight. So, there are inherent challenges in every profession, and I think to the extent that we are diligent about the way that we're compensating teachers, but at the same time, and I forgot to ask Rosalind where she was on her freak out meter, but it seems like we're losing ground and not gaining ground. We got tough decisions to make going forward, and I've said it in the past, and I'm going to advocate for it again now. As we're building budgets, I would love to have community members and teachers, and in a very public setting, a budget calculator on the webpage. These are thankless decisions that we have to make. These are tough decisions to choose between increasing salaries and taking away programs, and it's not getting any easier. And when I hear a $28 million budget deficit, and I appreciate Director Vial's optimism, because the legislature, sometimes they can get stuff done, and sometimes they're very good at kicking the can down the road. And when they're kicking cans, it has real-world impacts for our kids and families and staff.
I think given their election status, they aren't going to kick that can down the road.
I completely agree with you.
I would be willing to.
So I think we have to make decisions accordingly, and we got to prepare for the absolute worst. And I think the more public we can have that conversation with as many stakeholders as possible, so we get a variety of perspectives to inform the tough decisions that inevitably we're going to have to make. Thank you.
Director Winskill?
No report tonight.
Director Vial?
Just a comment on Director Hines' comments. I was the deputy director of the state budget office during the Boeing bust, where we almost went bankrupt twice, and we cut 1/3 of state programs. But what we did it in a thoughtful and appropriate manner in terms of looking at our priorities as a state, who are our most vulnerable, what were our programs, and that was where budgeting by priorities came. We didn't call it that. We called it program decision budgeting. But the way I say that is I think that there's really acknowledgement off the record on the part of a lot of legislators on both sides of the aisle, not just from here. As I say, I've got friends that are all over the state from having been around who know they need to fix that. And it came back 83 and grandfathered, and they got rid of the salary distribution, statewide salary survey, and all that malarkey. And I think we will see that some movement towards that, particularly addressing the most highly impacted districts in the next biennium. And then it'll probably take about 6 years to totally fix all the junk, and we call it junk, in that 2242. But I think this one, they really realize now that oops, because we're not the only ones that got that big oops. And it's fortunate that it's spread geographically across the state, where some people might not be inclined to help us out. But let me tell you, there was those cot days during that time from 1973 till we came out of that pretty much in 1975. But if we will have some tough decisions if we don't, but if we engage and we do it thoughtfully and we look at the impacts and we talk to take public comment, but the ultimate decision will rest with us. And I think the more we explain to our public what these big decisions are, and the fact that and I understand the frustration of our teachers. I've been a teacher. I've been in higher ed in the state, and I've been in elementary. That where they need to go is to the state legislature, because we can do some things, but with a $28 million potential deficit on the horizon, that it's going to be very difficult for us to do what we want to do. Not only for our teachers, but for our kids across the board on the programs. And I think all of us here, on the board, we have fiduciary responsibilities. And we are responsible for over $400 million worth of money. We're responsible for making sure that money is well spent, and it is spent on the things that most benefit our kids. And we're going to be doing the balancing of the scales, and went through the same thing when I was mayor. We had to make significant cuts. One thing I was very glad to see is during that time, Harvey and Beulah got cut, and now they're back. And for those who don't know what Harvey and Beulah are, they're the talking motorcycles. Andrea, you probably saw them when you were in school. And it's a big safety thing, and it was wonderful when they were there, and now they're out in the schools. And I think that's one way, maybe, Director Hines, we can compensate a little bit for some of the things that we were talking about. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm optimistic, but I also know that we can survive this if we do it if we have to, if we do it in a thoughtful, non-reactive way, and as you said, if we lead from a strong position, and I know that that's what this board will do. The good thing I got to do over the weekend, on Saturday, I represented Superintendent Santorno at the 12th Annual TCC Tacoma Public Schools powwow honoring our Native graduates. And there were about 20 kids that came, and it was a great day. And that's just such a great program. They have Native dancing and food. And this year, TCC moved it to their gym, which allowed much more participation on the part of the dancing, and also allowed an arena for people to sit. And you and I have both been there a number of times. It's a program that's near and dear to my heart. And I want to thank Tacoma Community College, Bill Ryberg and Mary Chiquina, who have served as co-presidents, and they are counting the days down till May 1st as to when they get to go back to their vice president's jobs, and for the great partnerships that they have with us. And this is that one was a big one. And David Scythe tells me that we are looking at having a fairly large graduating class this year of Native kids, that we've really upped the numbers. So this is just a way of celebrating them, and it was fun. So thank you.
I just have one item. Over the last weekend on Saturday, I got to go and participate in part of the College Bound Saturday for high school college bound students. So that was a great event, and Mount Tacoma was the host, and lots of participation and support from College Success Foundation, local colleges, and just local community organizations who support our kids. So it was just a great event, a continuation of a long history. But just the one downfall of the day, and I just want to acknowledge it publicly and to apologize for some of our families who were in attendance, and they're expecting to have translation and interpretation support there, and because of communication, it just didn't happen. So it was a great event, and families were out, and I would have loved to see even more families out, but for those who were there and couldn't access all the content because the communication fell through and the interpreters weren't there, I just want to apologize and know that we're working on fixing that and making sure it never happens again, and that it's just a great event, and hope that even more folks will participate next year. But that's all I had.
Great.
So with that, announcement of future board meetings, item 16, Thursday, May 10th, we will meet at 6 p.m. for our regular business meeting. Thursday, May 17th, and we'll meet at 6 p.m. for a study session. And there's no executive session tonight. And with that, we are adjourned.
You know, I went last year, and they did have it. Somebody just... turn out, and, I didn't go because our...